Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the Galapagos. I'm the director of my university, Universidad San Francisco de Quito. We have a campus there, and I'm one of the directors of that. And now we have also a research center with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So let me talk a couple of things about the history of the Galapagos and how that history affects the islands. The Galapagos, a couple of dates that are very important. They were first discovered in 1536 by Tomás de Berlanga, Spaniards who really discovered them by mistake. He wanted to go down to Peru and see what was going on with the Spaniards fighting there, and he ended up in the Galapagos, and he hated it. He said that he wonders what God was thinking when he created the Galapagos. After that was mostly pirates and privateers who went there. Of course, one of the most famous visitors of the Galapagos was Charles Darwin, who got there in September 1835, and after that it was, no, I'm sorry, before that, in 1832, the Ecuadorian government had claimed the Galapagos as part of its territory. So we have that Ecuador claimed the Galapagos in 1832. The Galapagos then started to become well known for its scientific value. So one of the things that the Galapagos has is this incredible connection to the theory of evolution and the place that you can study evolution. That's kind of unique in a way to the Galapagos. Then in 1859, 100 years after the publication of The Origin of the Species, the Galapagos was declared a national park by the Ecuadorian government, and the Charles Darwin Foundation was created in 1859, 1959, sorry. So 1959. In 1978, the UNESCO declared the Galapagos a World Heritage Site. By 2007, the Galapagos declared the UNESCO declared the Galapagos an endangered place. So we'll talk about that. And now they have removed the Galapagos from the endangered list. And many people think that that was way too early to remove the Galapagos, and should be still in the endangered list. So there's still a controversy about that. Galapagos, contrary to Fraser Island, but like Hawaii, the Galapagos is a volcanic archipelago, it's an oceanic island. So that means it's never been connected to the mainland. It's mostly 13 large islands. We have, as the Galapagos is moving because of plate tectonics, is moving towards the eastern part. So the older islands are the older islands as Española and San Cristobal, which are around 3-4 million years old. The newer islands are Isabela and Fernandina, which are around 1 million years old. So the Galapagos is moving towards the east slowly, around 20 million years, around 3-4 centimeters a year. We have a campus in Quito, and I always tell my international students who don't have money to go to the Galapagos that if they wait 20 million years, the Galapagos will make it to them, but probably won't happen. And so the age of the islands, which are some of the key factors that make the Galapagos important for the study of evolution? The age of the islands is a key factor. The distance between the islands and the mainland, and the distance between the island, so that's another important factor. The diversity of the ecosystems. We have two main sources of diversity that we'll discuss. One is because of oceanic currents, and the other one has to do with the altitude. So those provide for a lot of diversity in the islands, and we'll discuss a bit that. And there's also another thing that makes the Galapagos interesting and kind of, to some extent, well-preserved ecosystem is that there has been no history of early colonization. So contrary to many other islands in the Pacific, the Galapagos didn't have this first impact of, let's say, early people going there. And we do have the second impact, which is of European and Ecuadorians going there, which is quite dramatic, but there was no this early impact of people. And the relatively high degree of protection, which, as we will see, has a lot of issues and a lot of problems, but it has 97% of the island is a national park and is one of the biggest marine reserves in the world. So since 1998, the Galapagos was declared, the marine reserve was declared. So the Galapagos, in a way, is a weird place. It's weird because it's right in the equator, and you have, right now, I was there 2 weeks ago, and the water temperature was, in some areas, is already around 17 degrees centigrade. So it shouldn't happen, right? I mean, like 60 or so, what's that, 60 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. So it was very cold. I was with a group of students from Louisiana who were complaining about how cold it was. They didn't realize in the tropics it could get that cold. And that all happened has to do with marine currents to a large extent. You have this one here, which is an equatorial undercurrent, which crashes against the eastern part of the islands and creates a lot of upwellings. So you have a lot of upwellings in this region here. You can see the upwellings because of the what's called the Cromwell current. Then you have another cold current, which is the Humboldt current, which also comes from the south and also creates cold conditions in this southeastern part of the islands. And you have the warm current, the North Ecuadorian current, the Panama current, which makes a lot of the northern islands very tropical and what you would expect to have in the Galapagos, which is very tropical ecosystems. This is a bit like the same with... So you have in the Galapagos, you have corals, although many of them were gone after El Nino in 1982-83, together with penguins. There's one of the smallest penguin and the only one that lives north of the equator. You have sea lions, 2 species of sea lions, which are usually found in more temperate areas, with other more tropical species like hammerheads and other tropical areas. One of the important things when we talk about climate change in the Galapagos, one of the very important things that to keep in mind has to do with El Nino. El Nino is a very important effect. So all this pattern of upwellings and cold water and all that changes because of El Nino. El Nino southern oscillation, which is actually formed by El Nino and La Nina. So we have this mass of heat that moves towards the eastern Pacific, which really changes conditions in the Galapagos. Among other things, it makes these upwellings stop, so you have less nutrients for the fish and for the animals. So you have in the Galapagos, you have this incredible seasonal variability for a tropical region. You have very cold, very warm events, which puts surface temperature 4 or 5 degrees centigrade above normal, and very cold events with La Nina, which puts the surface temperature to -4 degrees or so. So for being a tropical area, again, you have this incredible variability. There's a wonderful book, maybe some of you have read, about the work of Peter and Rosemary Grant, The Beak of the Finch. And in that book, they describe very well how Peter and Rosemary Grant from Princeton have been looking at the evolutionary impact of El Nino and La Nina and how they've been measuring the beak of the finch, the finch's beak for 30 or 40 years in a couple of islands. And they have been able to trace how El Nino and La Nina makes that, has important evolutionary impact on that. Sea level also rises during El Nino and La Nina. The changes, it rises during El Nino, lowers during La Nina. So that means that the Galapagos, in a way, will probably not be heavily impacted by sea level rise, not like other oceanic islands. So it is relatively elevated. Most of the towns are not exactly at sea level. Some of them are a bit low, but most of it, that will probably not be the greatest impact. There will be other things that we are more worried about, like what will happen with these upwellings, because these upwellings are really important. So what will happen with upwellings? So we've been looking at what can happen and which are some of these effects with El Nino. And one of these is thermocline deepens. It becomes much deeper. Primary production decrease. And we will have already some trophic levels, some cascade effects on the trophic levels. This is what we can detect with El Nino and different, this is the 97, 98 El Nino, which was a very strong El Nino. So we have, this is the surface temperature, and we have that areas that are usually have these strong upwellings become very, very warm. And there's, instead of having this cold water, red means surface temperature above normal. So instead of having these strong upwellings bringing a lot of nutrients, especially in the eastern region, in the western part of the islands, it becomes actually quite warm and poor, the water, contrary to the thermocline against lowers a lot. So the thermocline, which usually is around 60 meters below the surface, it goes down much deeper, and that also means that there's less nutrients for all of these ecosystems. Now, the problem with that is that, according to some models of climate change, there's 51 or 52%, last time I checked this, say that the El Nino might become either more prevalent and or more frequent. So that will be probably one of the great impacts that we can see with climate change in the Galapagos, could be changes in El Nino and probably... So we have one of the things we've seen in last. So many people have used El Nino as kind of a proxy, and there's some problems with that, and many people think it's not the right thing to do, but some people have used El Nino as kind of a proxy to understand what could happen with climate change in the Galapagos. And again, if that's the case, the Galapagos is probably going to see some major changes in its ecosystems, and it's because what we see in previous El Niños are that we have a strong mortality of some species. We'll talk a bit about some of those. And we have also some species that stop breeding and stop reproducing. So we'll have animals that will be seriously affected with some of these El Nino. So, for example, the 82-83 El Nino killed a lot of the corals. Some of these corals have not recovered yet from that El Nino event. 95% of the corals were actually killed by the 82 and 83 El Nino. So there will be a lot of different effects with the density of sea urchins and stuff like that. This is what happens with penguins and flightless cormorants. These are two of the most iconic species of the Galapagos, probably, and their populations really drop during El Nino events. So we have that they stop reproducing, many of the eggs don't hatch, and many of them die, and they don't. Especially penguins are very vulnerable because they are monogamous, so they would not recover as easily as flightless cormorants that are a bit less monogamous, and they tend to form pairs easily with other females. Other animals that really numbers go down are marine iguanas. They have a marine iguanas population also go down mainly because of the grazing, the algae that they depend on has gone down during this El Nino event. So marine iguanas that depend on ulva and other green algae, the population of green algae is very much affected, and they have a lot of problems feeding, so their numbers go down. Sea lions population, we've been studying sea lions, and there's a bit of a debate. We don't know what's going on. Their numbers, there was a census like 20 years ago, and their numbers were 40,000. Now there's like 14,000 according to the last census. We are not sure why. The last year we were studying a special one disease that we still haven't been able to identify what exactly is happening, but a lot of the animals were affected by high mortality of the pups, and we're not sure why. But that could be to some extent related to things like global change, not only climate change, but maybe diseases brought by invasive species and other factors. So again, feeding some of these large iguanas feed on especially the males, the large males, they dive and they feed on the algae that's found under in the rocks, and that could be an important factor also. So there's, like other people have mentioned before, there's a lot of issues that cannot be seen only, climate change cannot be seen only independently, like one single effect, but there's a lot of things that are changing already in the Galapagos that we have to keep in mind. And this has to do with environmental changes, especially in some areas because of overfishing. We have some effects of overfishing, and we'll talk a bit about that. Another thing might have to do also with things like oil spills. We had a big oil spill in 2001. Most of the energy that the Galapagos uses has to be shipped from outside the islands, and there was a big important oil spill in 2001. Which created a lot of mortality among marine iguanas and other animals. Introduced species, for sure. That's probably one of the main threats, especially to, we've heard of introduced species already, but especially in isolated and oceanic islands. Introduced species is probably the biggest threat of all right now to the Galapagos.